Women's Rights, Reform Movements, a Study Guide. In the mid-1800s, women were not allowed to vote, they were not allowed to hold office, and they were not even allowed to retain ownership or control of their property. When they were unmarried, their property and money belonged to their father or their older brothers, sometimes your younger brothers, uncles. Any male in the family had more right to their property than they did. And once they married, all of their property and money belonged to their husbands. The fight for abolition often encouraged women to fight for their own rights. However, that did not stop many preachers and husbands from scolding them and telling them to keep their place. Sojourner Truth was born Isabella Baumfree. She fought for abolition, women's rights, and Christianity. She was an escaped slave, and she changed her name after having a vision from God. A sojourn is a journey, so her name meant a journey for truth, and she said in this vision God told her to change her name. She made a famous speech called "Ain't I a Woman?" at an abolitionist meeting in 1851. One of the speakers had been talking about how women should be protected and cared for, and this was her response to him. "The man over there says women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over puddles or gives me the best place, and ain't I a woman? I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children and seen most of 'em sold into slavery, and when I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus hear me, and ain't I a woman?" During the Civil War, she fought against segregated transportation. She wrote a narrative of her life and worked with Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison to publish it and to help end slavery. Elizabeth Cady Stanton went to the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention with her friend Lucretia Mott. After this, she decided to hold the first National Women's Rights Convention. It was held in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York, and 200 women and 40 men gathered to discuss issues that related to women's rights. It was called the Seneca Falls Convention, and during the convention, the women and men wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, which said, among other things, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." They took the Declaration of Independence and included women in it. Many resolutions about work and school and church were passed during the convention. But when it came to a resolution demanding the right to vote, many of the attendees considered it to be too bold. You're asking for too much. But after much discussion, that resolution also passed. It would be 1920, however, before the women actually gained the right to vote. The convention also inspired many women to attempt things that had long been denied them. For example, Emma Willard opened an all-girls high school which taught traditionally men's subjects like math, physics, and philosophy. Mary Lyon, in 1837, she opened the first female college in our country called Mount Holyoke. It was a female seminary in Massachusetts. Several other colleges followed her example and opened classes up to women to attend. Elizabeth Blackwell entered medical school at Geneva College in New York. None of her professors believed that she had what it took to make it, and she ended up graduating first in her class. And finally, we have Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony grew up in a Quaker family of activists, where she discovered a strong sense of justice in dealing with others. She taught for 15 years before deciding to join the temperance movement. She was not allowed to speak at the temperance rallies, which led to her decision to join the women's rights movement in 1852. She was acquainted with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and decided to join her in her fight for women's suffrage. Anthony traveled and lectured across the nation for the women's right to vote. She campaigned for the abolition of slavery, women's rights to their own property and earnings, and for women to have their own labor organizations. In 1900, she persuaded the University of Rochester to admit women to their classes. She remained active until her death on March 13th of 1906, and in her honor, the U.S. Mint made the Susan B. Anthony dollar coin. And these are just a few of the women that were involved in the women's rights movements. And now you know a little bit about them.